So I'm going to talk about the work of the Almond Board in researching groundwater recharge. And I'm going to start off just with, first of all, can you see the slides? Okay. Start off because not everybody's familiar with what commodity boards do. So I just want to give a brief background on the Almond Board and what it is that we do and how we're organized, and then a little bit about the almond industry. And then I want to get into our new groundwater recharge guide that is a result of several years of work and really probably at least going back 6-7 years of research and collaboration, probably with several people that are on the line today. And let's see, this is the vision and mission of the Almond Board: make life better by what we grow and how we grow. And the primary role of commodity board is to market the product. And there's a lot of different pieces to that. My piece primarily is around regulations that can impact production, and therefore the product that we have, or our growers and handlers have to sell. And we also do research into best practices and production. Here's how we're organized. We're a commodity board under the Ag Marketing Service within USDA. We're not directly a government agency, but we do follow a lot of those guidelines. So it's a very interesting role that commodity boards have. And for that international trade, which is a large part of what we do, we work a lot with the Foreign Ag Service. And to differentiate, that we're a federal marketing order, different than other ones that you might be familiar with that really only do marketing. We've got a lot more bandwidth for what we can work on, including research. And part of what we've done historically is work on quality control. And there are a lot of international standards when almonds are traded around aflatoxin, pesticide residue, percent damage. All of those are sort of under our purview. And also we just do a lot of sampling to make sure that when we ship, for example, into Europe, we have a pre-export check so that they don't have to check every incoming package that goes into Europe. But we can do it here first. And logistics and trade has been a big challenge during COVID, and I'm sure that's something people have heard about. The board is elected, 10 members, 10 alternates, 5 growers, 5 handlers, staggered terms. And we are organized in a series of committees, and one of the committees is really focused on sustainable ag innovation and research. And then we also have working groups that look at different parts of that, whether it's pollination, harvest, pest management, those sorts of topics. Biomass is another key one. And then I manage our agriculture regulatory subcommittee. And here's sort of how our budget's broken out. You see that SAIC, that's the research part of the budget. And then we've also got global technical and regulatory affairs. That's where we follow regulations. But you can see that the vast majority goes into global market development and really promoting the consumption of almonds in a variety of different forms. And the way that we're funded is through 3 cents of every pound that's sold into the market by what are called handlers. These are essentially certified traders, goes to fund our budget. And it's at this one that, Orit, I wanted you to do your second question. So figure out if I can.
Excellent. Okay. So I put the slido.com and the number in the chat, and I'll also share it. So that will take just a minute. And I think you need to unshare. Okay. So everybody should be able to see the QR code. And the question that we're asking is, and this is just a type in, what do you think some barriers might be to growers doing more on-farm recharge? So go ahead and just add to it. And Jesse, do you see that on the share screen?
I can see it on the shared screen.
Okay, great. All right. So we'll just take a quick minute for you to just brainstorm barriers. So water availability, water rights, yield impacts, other thoughts? All right, soil, cost, tech support, conveyance of the infrastructure, permitting. You can see water rights is showing up in different ways. All right. So you can continue and add to it, but I'm going to turn it back to you, Jesse.
Yeah,
and you can come back and look at it. These are great.
Great.
Yeah.
So definitely some of those topics that people were mentioning came up when we were initially putting together a research strategy to promote groundwater recharge. And the idea came to us, as I understand it, through sustainable conservation, giving a presentation to one of our committees. And we were able to fund not only our work with sustainable conservation, but all the researchers listed here through our accelerated innovation management task force and program. And this was, we raised the assessment to 4 cents per pound because we could see that there was a large amount of product based on the significant new plantings that were going in for almonds. And so there was a big need to improve both on the marketing side, but also an opportunity to improve water management efficiency, sustainable water resources, air quality, and really develop this 22nd century agronomics. So we were able to fund a lot of projects and research projects that we normally wouldn't have gotten to do. And that included working on mapping, improving our remote mapping with Land IQ. Nitrogen management was a key barrier. How would we manage water quality if we're doing expanded recharge? Just what was the idea? Helen Dahlke has, of course, been a key leader in this space, working with Astrid Volder, doing recharge in several field sites to test crop health. Peter Nico to look at fields and characterize them and flow paths and see how that might influence site selection, and similar work with Rosemary Knight around totem to remotely identify the best sites for recharge. And really the key takeaway was that applying additional water during dormancy is not likely to have negative impacts on almond orchards and moderately to well-drained soils. And a real quick run through on the almond life cycle here, you can see that essentially right now we're in dormancy, great time for recharge if there's excess water. But then you get bloom, you go into nut development, and the maturing nuts, a key time is that hull split, which is what you see there, which is when some of our key pests, the navel orangeworm, can then get into the kernel, and that's where aflatoxin can come from. Then we have harvest and processing into multiple different forms, and then sort of it starts over again. And we've seen a lot of growth in the industry. We're estimating around 1.68 million acres. 1.33 million of that is bearing. So bearing are trees that are 4 years or older. Generally, a tree lasts around 25 years before it's that orchard's taken out. Stretch north to south, you can see where most of our production comes from is in the south, in the San Joaquin Valley. We're all of the U.S. production. There's a couple trials in Idaho and Arizona. 82% of worldwide production. Several a top specialty crop. Of course, the non-specialty crops are the corn, wheat, soybean types of crops from the Midwest. So we grow over 400 crops in California, and we're one of them. And a lot of that goes towards export, contributes to jobs and just gross domestic product in a very disadvantaged area, the San Joaquin Valley and the Central Valley in general. So agricultural jobs as well. And you can see just the growth in acreage. Most of this is due to price. When we see a lot of expanded acreage, that's because the price of almonds is high. And then when you see cutbacks, the price goes down. So it's pretty directly correlated. You can see that the growth continues. Now prices have been pretty low recently. As a result of this expanded production, there's a lot of product. With logistics issues, it can be hard to ship it. So price has been low, so we may see some leveling off of acreage or expansion. And for this one, I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of our goals with doing this recharge guide and working in recharge in general. We want to make sure we understand the crop impacts, how to do best practices, for example, with nutrient management, nitrogen in particular, help develop grower tools so growers can get familiar with the idea and be comfortable with it. And that's really the purpose, one of the primary purposes of this guide that we've published. We'd also hope to do workshops with growers on sites that are practicing recharge. We, of course, as part of this LunchMAR and the RAC committee, looking at all the policies, tools, and incentives that can help expand this process, following the development of the groundwater sustainability plans and the role of recharge in getting basins into balance, water markets. The new NRCS incentive is of particular interest to our growers. And how can we just demonstrate success with great pilots out there, like, for example, the project in Merced, or some Terra Nova, or other key efforts looking at subsurface recharge on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. And of course, we're always looking to partner, as you can see by that list of researchers that has really helped the Almond Board do this work. So with the turning now to the guide, this was really a labor of love, but with a lot of sweat that went into it, with the challenge being that we wanted it to be accessible to growers and really talk to growers. So starting from a very high level, what is groundwater recharge? The research that we've done showing its safety, asking key questions. Is it a fit for your operation? It's very hard to grow any crop, and adding another variable like excess water is just something to take into account. And you have to make sure you're a fit. What types of recharge are there available? And then to really make it even more accessible to growers, here are some examples of growers that are trying this. And thinking long and hard about why recharge? Why should growers do this? Well, they need to address a future of declining groundwater quality, quantity, and availability. Want to improve overdrafted aquifers, increase storage, decrease pumping costs, improve salt management, mitigate subsidence, got to comply with SGMA, and ultimately secure reliable, sufficient, and drought resilient groundwater supplies. So here's just an image that we got from Sustainable Conservation, showing these concepts and the benefits to aquifers from doing recharge, and organize the guide around 4 key questions that a grower, when they're thinking of and looking at this, what should they consider? Do I have access to surface water for recharge? Is my orchard soil suitable for recharge? What recharge methods are available? And then last, what orchard management changes are necessary to perform recharge? So starting with this first question, do I have access to surface water for recharge? Of course, growers are going to have to work with their GSAs and their irrigation districts to figure this out. One key to this is if you're in a district, that's really just about, I think, the only way you could get surface water. So looking at our footprint in 2019, there's around 73% of almond orchards that are in water districts, 27% are outside or in what are called white areas. And you can see here on the right, the blue areas are the almond orchards that are outside of irrigation districts and are on groundwater only. And then second, is my orchard soil suitable for recharge? And this is where it can get a little bit more complicated, but really in a nutshell, it's sandy soils, sandy streets can make it hard to do flood irrigation, but are preferred for recharge. And we know, looking at the research that we've done with both Peter Nico, Rosemary Knight, other researchers, that soils are heterogeneous, there are preferential flow paths. So you can look at your whole orchard and flooding your entire orchard, or possibly look for where those best areas are, those sandy streets. And particularly if you don't have enough water to irrigate your entire ranch, maybe taking some of those areas out of production, putting in basins to do more targeted recharge. And there's some online tools that we've developed, starting with the SAGB index, but also looking at other factors, depth to groundwater, and geologic impediments like cork and clay that could reduce the advantages of any particular orchard doing recharge. And one interesting note here is that even if you have cork and clay, it may be possible to install a recharge line underneath that layer and still reach more permeable layers underneath. So with Land IQ, we developed this online tool for growers to just do an initial determination of whether they might be a good candidate. And it's based on 2014 acreage. We haven't updated it. I know that Sustainable Conservation has their GRAT tool that may have more updated acreage coverage and other crops. So Daniel's on. I think you can put a link in the chat. But this really came out of another partnership with Land IQ, UC Davis, Sustainable Conservation, and then Lawrence Berkeley. So this is online at almonds.com/maps, and you can see sort of those layers that we use to develop this online map. Bottom line, around 675,000 acres were moderately good or better for recharge. So plenty of room for growers to support recharging aquifers with on-farm recharge. And then it's right here, Orit, that I wanted to ask your third and last question. So I'm going to stop sharing again.
All right. Let's see. So we asked the questions about the barriers, and you're speaking to that in addressing those 4 questions. And then the next question is, what type of recharge have you worked on? And you can select more than one: surface application to orchards, below the surface of agricultural fields, and basins or water conveyance structures. So you can use the same poll. There you go.
And while those are coming in, I'll just mention that these are the 3 types of recharge that we cover in the guide.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so as people are answering this, and I think as you're answering, you can also see the results. I'm going to let you talk about these 3, and we can continue on and come back to it.
Okay. Let's see. It's coming up. While that's coming up on my, well, so I had to pick a different method. Can you still see that?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. So these are the 3 methods that we covered in the guide and worked with a former fellow student from UC Berkeley to do these drawings, landscape architect. I love landscape architecture and renderings. And Jennifer Natali just does a fantastic job with just looking at these ideas and conveying them in really simple and straightforward figures. And, you know, among these 3 methods, surface application to orchards, advantage is you can use the existing orchard, but it's going to take some management changes. If you're doing it below the surface of agricultural fields, you've got to install it prior to planting, and may be more expensive than just using an existing orchard. But the significant advantage is you don't have to do any orchard management changes. And then lastly, with basins or water conveyance structures, it could be a part of land repurposing. And again, you probably won't have many management changes that you have to do, other than taking some part of an orchard out of production. So looking at drilling in sort of to what changes are needed if you do on farm, an advantage is it's less expensive. Hopefully you can use existing systems. Of course, if you have to sometimes reinstall flood irrigation, a turnout to conveyance, that's going to be a cost. It does have, as far as barriers, it does have these potential impacts to crop health and yield, but part of these are due to the excess humidity and disease, potential disease impacts. But the idea is that by going with one of these three methods and doing any necessary cultural changes, you can avoid any crop impacts. We focused on dormant, but as you can see in this bottom picture, other folks are testing out in-season recharge as well. And also want to flag that fallow fields can be a good location for recharge. Like I said, almonds are on a 25-year cycle. There can be agronomic benefits to extending that dormant period beyond just a year. There's something called replant disease that can be present in the soil, and it's often managed through fumigation before a soil is replanted. But extending the fallow period can also help control that, potentially without doing fumigation. And another way just to make sure that doing recharge isn't having any negative impacts is to have a similar field with just without the over application of water for the purpose of recharge. Other changes that might be helpful as within furrows, is setting up berms to help water slow down and percolate in. Tree berms, often you'll see common cultural practice is putting trees up on berms, especially if you're doing flood irrigation. And that keeps the root system above water and saturation, mitigating those risks to plant health. And then if it's not set up for flooding, you may have to build a berm around the recharge field to help hold that water while it sinks in. And then other practices that can be helpful is like this picture below, just targeting water into specific checks. If you've only got a certain amount of water available and you sort of want to focus it, you could just do it in one check between two tree rows. You could do it, you can rotate it through checks. Surging it can be helpful in making increasing rates of infiltration. And then probably the one we looked at was complete ponding of the entire field, which, as I said, has been shown to be safe in the dormant season, especially on soils that that are sandier, but can also be used on soils that have slower infiltration, where you could need to spread the water out more broadly. One issue that comes up is disease, and these are some of the possible diseases that happen with excess moisture. And we see with that Phytophthora could come in with surface water, might also be present already in the soil. Alternaria tends to be repeatedly in certain locations. So if you have a history of alternaria, you want to be a little bit more cautious about doing recharge. And then whole rot is something, if you get a lot of water after that sensitive period that I described on hull split, it's a standard practice when you get near that time in July to cut back and do a regulated deficit irrigation, cut back the water around 30% so that you get an even split, an even harvest timing. And when you shake the trees for harvest, you get as many nuts falling off the tree in that first shake as possible. Another key management consideration is nutrition, and we've done a lot of research in how much nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other micronutrients it takes to grow a crop. And this is required as part of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. We were one of the first crops to really have this information by taking trees at different stages during the year and just breaking them down and looking at how much nitrogen uptake there had been. And I believe it's around 63 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 pounds of crop. And there are different cultural practices you can do for when you apply nitrogen to limit the amount that might go past the root zone and go into the aquifer. But a key piece here, and I think something to further develop and sort of center, is that additional water, seemingly dilution is a solution to pollution. So if those, especially if those are legacy nitrates that are already out there from crops going back even as far as 50 or more years, by adding additional water, you'll be diluting those legacy nitrates. Then we get to below the surface of agricultural fields. And here, tile drains are something that have been used for agricultural areas along, for example, river corridors, where the groundwater levels are so high that they get into the root zone, and you want to take it. It's sort of an odd problem to have, but you got to move the water away from the root zone, drain it away, so that you can grow crops with a more carefully applied amount of water. And the idea here is that you take those tile drains and put them below ground, maybe as much as 10 feet below ground. And that way you separate when water might be available from, and when that water is available, what impact it might have on the crop. So you can actually apply it any time of the year, and you won't have to consider the impacts on the crop. And you can use the same water conveyance system that you have on the surface of your farm, and if you have excess water, apply it to that tile drain underneath. You do have to work in advance and install this before you plant your permanent crop on the surface. And I borrowed these crops from one of our committee members, Robert Halterman, who's a grower on the west side, and I think he got them from a company that's doing this called Lidco. And this is just another image of how these work. And often I think you really have to carefully monitor how much water you apply, because this could be used as part of a water bank or as part of GSA management consideration. So you want to know how much water you're applying. And just a few images for how this works. It goes into this standpipe and goes down to the tile drain at the bottom. And like I said, flow meters are really important in terms of keeping track of how much water you're applying. And you want to understand your soil type before you do this, and then you do the design installation and just monitor how it's performing and make sure that the amount of water that you thought you would be applying is actually getting into going through the system and getting into the aquifer. They report installing 17 projects as of May of last year, most of them in almonds. And then the last method is basins or water conveyance structures. And here I just reference the multi-benefit opportunities of doing recharge in general. In particular, with basins, you could have flooded areas for migratory birds, and also the recharge from any type, the benefits for drinking water supplies, groundwater dependent ecosystems. So we know that finding ways to really get these multi-benefits is key to getting broader support for these water supplies into these parts of the San Joaquin Valley. And multiple ideas here. There are these large-scale dedicated recharge basins that have been a part of groundwater management probably since its beginning, and then smaller on-farm recharge basins that could be a part of the multi-benefit program and that's that DWR is sort of, I think, just closed comments on. If you do end up needing to take some ground out of production, at least even temporarily or for 10 years, repurposing that as groundwater recharge basins, it could be multi-benefit, is certainly an idea out there and worth consideration. And then also, or lastly, the unlined canals or irrigation ditches, just if they're unlined, they're going to contribute to recharge. And you can also put checks in those if you have water in the wintertime, and use those as recharge structures. And those large basins are major undertakings, so you want to look broadly at these different methods to figure out what is the most cost-effective way of doing this across a basin, and some considerations if you're doing it on site. Mosquito control is one that I'm familiar with and past work that I've done. You would avoid anywhere where there's been high nitrogen applications or a history of land use that would have had high nitrogen applications. And you've got to manage those and maintain those basins as well. So just in conclusion, as far as our next steps, we'd really like to set up a grower practitioner network so growers can learn from other growers, hopefully using this guide, getting introduced and seeing how it's working or not working, as the case may be, and continue to learn, because we know we're at the beginning of this and always want to keep improving. And having field days seems like just a great opportunity to really expand this type of idea more broadly. We know that DWR is working with sustainable conservation on case studies, and also NRCS is developing pilots for recharge incentives. Want to look at, can those subsurface systems be considered as part of any incentive programs in addition to on-farm and basins. Look at incentive programs. What can we do here in California, for example, through SWEEP, monitor, or potentially through these multi-benefit land repurposing grants to promote more recharge. And there are other larger collaboratives, the San Joaquin Valley Water Collaborative Action Program, as well as the Water Blueprint, that are looking at these bigger policy issues and trying to build coalitions, again, to expand with shared interests to expand the use of recharge. And then lastly, we just finished up a round of GSP reviews and responses from DWR. So taking a hard look at those and seeing which way we move in the future, and how Sigma really supports the expansion of doing groundwater recharge. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation. Hopefully, Ori and Jenny, we've got time for any questions. And again, thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Jesse. Great presentation. Afternoon, all. Jenny Meyer, Department of Water Resources. I'll help facilitate some of the Q&A. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat or turn your camera on and get in the queue and unmute folks, or unmute yourself if you'd like to ask questions live. Jesse, I've got a couple questions and I see one in the chat. One from Ben Hatchett. Can the recharge method used change the suitability of an orchard for recharge?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Can the recharge method used change the suitability of an orchard for recharge?
Well, I definitely think that depending on the soil type, the frequency that you might be getting excess water, you're going to want to use that information to pick a recharge method that would be best suited for you. So if you've got very sandy soils in your orchard, that throughout your orchard, you might be a really good candidate for on-farm recharge and just fully using your entire orchard. Whereas if it's just sandy streaks, again, I think selectively pulling some of that land out of production to install a basin might be the best method. And then if you have Corcoran clay on near the surface and you can get underneath it, then subsurface might be a good fit. You know, the impact of recharge over time, if you're doing on-farm recharge, I could imagine that could help possibly with salt management. It might have other effects on how you grow or that sort of thing too.
Thanks, Jesse. I have a question about the recharge methods as well. Based on kind of feedback you've gotten after the guidance has been rolled out, is there kind of a method that seems to have the most interest? Is it, surface application, subsurface application, or recharge basins? Does there seem to be, are the winds blowing one direction versus the other?
I would say we just released this at our conference in December, so probably too early to tell. I mean, I think the on-farm is certainly the one that's most familiar. I was talking to Daniel Mountjoy about this. I haven't really heard of many areas that have gone to some of those, like a distributed network of smaller recharge basins, for example. That might come up in one of the multi-benefit grant program applications. I could imagine that. And I certainly think there's a lot of interest in particular areas on the west side in doing subsurface. And I don't know, west side of San Joaquin. So I don't know if that's going to be something that finds more applications in other parts of the Central Valley.
Thanks, Jesse. We've got a question from Adam Hutchinson. Are growers going to get a credit for recharge, and what's the benefit to their bottom line?
Great question, Adam. I think hard for me to say that will be or even if there's a universal answer to that. I think for any grower looking at the risk to benefit ratio, I think if there are credits, that's going to put more weight on the benefit side and hopefully outweigh the risks that or perceived risks that they might have with their crop. So growers, I think, look at their trees like little babies. You plant them, they're seedlings, they're very vulnerable. They've got an establishment period. They've got to get big and strong. Lots of tree architecture is defined in those first few years. So whether you would want to do recharge initially when they might also be more vulnerable to diseases. So I think those credits are going to be a key part in that risk to benefit calculation that growers are going to make when they look at this. And it's going to be dependent, I think, from GSA to GSA. So very hard. And I've also already heard about a number of different methods to incentivize growers to participate in these programs. So I think just like GSAs are locally controlled and managed and planned and structured, I imagine there will be a lot of different ways that GSAs come up with to promote recharge.
Yeah. Thanks, Jesse. I see Camiar has his hand up. Camiar, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Great presentation. It's really been great to see how forward-leaning the Almond Board has been on the research side, and certainly the LunchMAR network has benefited from it. I have one observation and then one question. The observation, you mentioned you're working to bring together a growers recharge network. I really like that word, network. And given the LunchMAR network is seen as somewhat of a network of networks, it sounds like that growers network could actually be a great addition to what we've been doing. The question is kind of following on Adam's comment about credits. I'm kind of going more to the incentive cost side. Has the Almond Board considered maybe doing a partnership with a flood management group to basically incentivize the use of on-farm recharge for flood risk reduction as part of a landowner compensation program? I know that this was thought about during the LunchMAR research and data development plan prep, this idea of a compensation program, but I think the state's going to need some piloting to work out how this would actually work.
I think great idea. I would, it's hard for me to speak for all growers, right? I mean, we're sort of an umbrella organization. And so just like basins are very particular and unique, I think flood risks are going to be very particular and unique. And, you know, the role of almond growers is going to be dependent on sort of maybe the ubiquitousness of them in any particular area. There might be a variety of crops. I know the GRAT tool sort of looks at crop suitability and time of year when that water might be available from a flood risk perspective. So I think any ideas for how to take that excess water and store it to the extent that it's not needed for ecological beneficial uses, I think is certainly an opportunity worth pursuing.
Thanks.
We've got a couple more minutes for questions. Jesse, I'm curious with the barriers that were identified in Slido, and unfortunately I didn't take a screenshot before I asked my question, but I believe some of the top getters were recharge potential, water rights, water availability. You know, is that consistent from what consistent with what you're hearing from growers, or what are growers perceiving as the largest barriers to on-farm recharge on almond orchards?
Well, so we're still new enough in this. It's hard. I know that growers have questions about the safety of on-farm recharge. So there's to the extent that we as the Almond Board or this network can help address those concerns, you know, that's the purpose of the guide. To the extent that policy or water rights permitting, I think, you know, through that RAC process, there were so many different factors. So to the extent that we can reduce any one of them as a barrier, I think that's going to be helpful. You know, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you could have all the grower willingness in the world, but if you don't have water, you're not gonna move forward. So a lot of this stuff is going to have to move forward just together. I think water rights are a perennial, or water availability, water reliability. It's a perennial challenge and an issue for growers in the San Joaquin Valley, probably just about anywhere in California. So definitely policy fixes are a piece of this puzzle.
Thanks. And last, maybe softball question. How can the network help? You know, is there a conversation we can have in the network, help with outreach? You know, is there a way to leverage the network to support the guidance and expanding implementation of on-farm recharge on almond orchards?
Yeah, great question. It's something I definitely want to think more about, but just off the top of my head, I think having worked in for environmental organizations and now having worked for 5+ years for an agricultural organization, I think the feeling among many growers is that underappreciation for the work that they do and the services that they provide. So to the extent that the network can really articulate clearly support for California agriculture, I think that's going to go a long way towards just getting adoption, getting support. So just any chance, I think, to articulate the importance of water supply reliability for agriculture, of course, given all the other competing needs and demands, is really going to go a long way for growers just to see their role in this and build that collaboration that I think is needed to do this on-farm recharge.
Thanks, Jesse. A great way to close. Thanks again for your time, a great presentation, and the great resource in the Almond Board's recharge guidance. I invite everyone who's still on to give a virtual round of applause or high five to Jesse, our speaker. Looking forward to the next LunchMAR. Please bring topics and volunteers my way for future conversations, and everybody have a happy Groundhog Day and a great February.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, everyone.